Today I want to tell you a touching story. It's about an Apache man and a white woman, both haunted by loss. Through pain, they found love and a reason to stay. If this story touches your heart, leave a comment below. The first time Eleanor Barrett opened her eyes, the world was hushed in a fragile quiet, till only wind and distant crows dared to speak. A house of burnt beams framed her view, and beneath her lay the only trace of life she'd willed back into motion. A woman wrapped in soaked dresses huddled in the dust. Nantan Noma stood over her, shadowed by the weak morning sun that filtered through broken timbers. He regarded her, the blue-eyed stranger, the duddle gender spoke of for several heartbeats before word came. "Drink," he said, offering a gourd of water, its surface rippling with soft light. She drank, trembling, and found herself swallowed by fear of what might come next. He did not speak again at first. When Eleanor tried to stand, her legs buckled, pain sharp, foreign spread across her side. Nan caught her, guided her to a patch of adobe bricks, still warm from overnight flames, and helped her sit. In silence, he tore a strip of cloth from his shirt and tied it around her rib cage. The pressure was firm, grounding. She realized then that he was no rescuer come for praise, but a man carrying ancient grief, ash-white and unspoken, like the soot that coated the old chapel's rafters. Over the next days, the desert scanned the ruined structure became their world. Eleanor woke stiff, her side bandaged. None offered her rabbit stew, its flavor smoky and unfamiliar. She ate slowly, nursing each bite like it might pull her whole back from something dark. Healing made little discussion. A measured herbs using methods whispered down through generations, stains of green leaves dried and tied with sinew. Smoke offered at dawn, a breath in ritual, an appeal to unseen forces. In that smoky, he said, the world spoke, ancestors listened. That night, Eleanor watched as he lit a small fire inside the ruin. He knelt and let the dry herbs burn. With the smoke spiraled toward cracks in the roof like rising prayer. "You believe in that?" she whispered. His eyes glowed, reflecting flame. "Ain," he said quietly. Creator, it was then she understood. He did not simply survive. He carried his people's stories in each breath. There was mourning. Yes, for a wife and child lost in Fort Buss captivity. But there was also a promise, not melodramatic, but steadfast as certain as earth. Days passed by that measureless time where fear fights to dissolve. Eleanor began remembering. She remembered the reason she fled. A husband-to-be who loved her as one loves what one owns. Political contracts, cold halls, and a wedding she never wanted. Nantan listened in the evenings, tending his fire or gazing into the embers while she spoke. His silence was not judgment. It was patience. He spoke only once. "We carry two roads, the one we walk and the one behind us. You still carry your road. Don't let it blind you to this one." When their words ended, Eleanor recognized her road had led her here. But perhaps this road might become something she wanted, though. One afternoon, light burned hot through the ruins' gaps. Eleanor crawled toward the edge of what remained of the altar, where carved symbols had turned to ash. She knelt in that dust. "I'm not sure what's real anymore," she said. He joined her, placing a hand in the dirt. "The land remembers us. We forget. The land whispers for us to remember." Silence shattered between them. But it was not uncomfortable. It was healing. When she finally stood weak but deliberate, he offered his arm. She accepted, and for a moment they walked side by side through the skeleton of the chapel. Outside the desert waited, sprawling in gold and orange wrappings that refused to look away. And between them stretched a quiet hoary horizon, fragile, waiting to be built into something more. The desert has its own way of marking time, not in hours or days, but in wind dust, and the way shadows grow long and thins before vanishing. For Eleanor Barrett, time unfolded in small moments, the rasp of bandages being changed, the unfamiliar taste of wild onion broth, the soft scuff of moccasins on stone floors. She'd stopped asking when they were leaving or why he hadn't taken her to town. The truth settled over her like a fine layer of grit. This ruined this man, and the slow rhythm of survival were all she had for now. Each morning Nantan rose before light. He moved with deliberate silence, stoking embers, boiling water, stepping out to listen to the land. Eleanor began waking earlier, though, learning to read his rituals, not through words, but through motion and stillness. On the fifth morning, she limped out to the broken archway and found him crouched by a patch of sagebrush. He held a thin strip of hide between his fingers, threading it through beads carved from bone. He didn't look up. "Medicine charm," he said, "for sleep." She sat beside him, breath shallow. "For me?" He gave the faintest nod. "You call names in your dreams." Cry without tears. Her throat tightened. She hadn't known he could hear. That night she held the charm to her chest and let herself remember. Not the assault, not the carriage door slammed shut, not the hands pulling her back into silken silence. She remembered her mother. Julia Barrett had worn the same gold cross every day of her life, a gift from her father, a soldier-turned-preacher. She taught Eleanor to read under an oil lamp, to whistle like a meadowlark, and to recognize false kindness when it came dressing to Zeddy. "He raised you for freedom," how she used to say, "not for show." Yet when her mother died, nooks came into their lives like fog rolling off the Mississippi, quiet, soft-spoken and thick enough to drown in. Eleanor told Dunn these things while he shaved cedar bark by firelight. She wasn't sure he understood every word, but he never interrupted. When she paused, he said only, "Your mother walks close." "Sis not done speaking." She blinked back the sting in her eyes. "Do you believe in ghosts?" It blew softly into the cedar shavings. They caught flame with a whisper. "Not ghosts," he murmured. "Memory, the kind that walks beside us. Makes no sound but leaves tracks." Days passed. Her strength returned. She moved through the chapel like someone born again to movement. Still sorry, still cautious, but no longer broken. Nantan showed her how to heat flat stones for warmth, how to find sweet water roots beneath racked earth. He said little, but watched her with the patience of someone who'd seen too many things die too fast. Then, one cloudless afternoon, she asked to hold his knife. He studied her a moment before handing it over, hilt first. She held it awkwardly, hands trembling. After a few tries, she managed to skin a prickly pear. "Not bad," he said finally. Her lips parted in surprise. It was the first praise he'd offered. "I didn't think you believed I could learn," she said. He turned back to his fire. "I don't teach people I don't believe in." The words settled deep, anchoring her more than she expected. One evening, she noticed a line of notches carved into the adobe near his bedroll. Each mark was the width of a finger, old and sun-faded. "What are these?" she asked. He hesitated, then tapped one of the deeper cuts. "My wife, my son," then another shallower. "My brother," then all the rest. She touched the wall gently. "Fort Bowie." His nod was small, sharp. Eleanor sat beside him, unsure what to say. After a while, she reached into her satchel and drew out a worn envelope, the one she'd kept hidden even as her coach burned. "This is my mother's last letter," she whispered. "She wrote it when she was sick, but I couldn't open it." Not when Knox stood at the door asking for my hand. She traced her thumb over the seal. He thought maybe if I ran far enough, the words inside wouldn't matter. Nanton didn't speak. Instead, he reached into the coals and pulled out a flat stone, laying it gently on the ground. "Then it waits with you," he said. "When you're ready," she nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, a soft rain fell. Eleanor woke with her fingers curled around the charm he'd given her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her sleep had held no ghosts. She stepped outside barefoot, letting the rain soak her nightdress and skin. The wind smelled of sage and juniper. She closed her eyes and let the desert wash her clean. Behind her, Nanton stepped into the doorway, silent. She turned. For a long moment, they stood in the rain, watching each other. Then she said, voice barely above the wind. "You think I'm starting to remember who I was before all this?" He stepped forward. "That woman, she's still here. The desert remembers." Their hands met, not grasping, but resting palm to palm as if trading warmth through skin alone. And in that simple touch, beneath a silver-gray sky, Eleanor felt the faintest shift in her soul, like dry earth, giving way to seed. The first time Eleanor tried to split wood, the axe lodged sideways into the grain and refused to come out. She stood over it, hands blistered, breath short, and cursed under her breath. Baying hair, Nanton sat repairing a cracked saddle strap. He said nothing for a time, then spoke without looking up. Don't fight the grain. Let it show you where to break. She wiped her brow. It's not the wood I'm fighting. He looked up. Data's met across the dusty clearing. Then you're losing to something that ain't even standing here. Eleanor blinked, unsure if he meant Knox, the lad she fled, or something deeper. Maybe all of it. By the next morning, her palms were wrapped in cloth, and she split 3 logs clean. Nanton didn't praise her, but his silence carried approval now warmer, steadier. Their days found rhythm. Eleanor gathered kindling. Nanton hunted or carved. At dusk they sat by the fire, sharing meat, stories, or simple silence. Some nights he taught her Apache words, water, sky, fire. Some nights she taught him names for constellations. What do you call that one? She asked, pointing. Nanton followed her finger. No name in my tongue. But my mother, she used to call it the woman who waits. She smiled. I like her already. One afternoon, Nanton handed her a small bow. Try. She hesitated. Eve never even held one. Then today's the first time. The string bit her fingers. The arrow dropped short. She tried again and again. On the 4th try, the arrow sailed halfway to the tree stump. Nanton grunted, impressed. The deer will live, but it'll feel wind on its neck. She laughed for the first time in weeks. It startled both of them. That night, the fire was low and the wind carried a ghostly hush through the chapel walls. Eleanor sat cross-legged near the coals, her mother's letter Uno opened in her lap. I think she knew, she whispered. About what he'd do. Nanton poured hot water into a tin cup. Mothers know storms before they see clouds. She traced her thumb over the envelope's edge. She told me to trust my own voice, but I let it get KO every year until I could barely hear it. He handed her the cup, their fingers brushed. Jure speaking now. They held that moment longer than they should have, long enough to feel it shift the hush between friendship and something heavier, warmer, more dangerous. Later that week, while checking the snare line, they found a fox half caught, whimpering, but still alive. Eleanor knelt, tried to free it, but its teeth found her wrist. She cried out. Nanton moved like lightning, binding the fox with his cloak, whispering in Apache as he held the trembling animal still. When the fox was gone, Eleanor sat on a rock, bleeding and quiet. Nanton cleaned the wound, hands gentle but firm. You should have let me do it, he muttered. He needed to try, she repeated. He looked up, eyes steady. There's a difference between courage and recklessness. He spent too many years choosing silence. He'd rather bleed than go back to that. He said nothing, but he didn't let go of her wrist even after the bleeding stopped. That night, Eleanor stood at the edge of the ruin, watching the moon rise over the mesa. Nanton joined her, bare-shouldered and quiet. Why do you stay here? She asked. This place is half broken, half forgotten. He nodded toward the sky. Everything I lost is buried under this horizon. If I leave it, I leave them. She touched his arm. Maybe they're not buried. Maybe they're waiting to be remembered. He turned to her and something in his gaze broke free, something unguarded. Jube walked where only my silence lived. Then with no warning but the ache in the air, he kissed her. It wasn't urgent or desperate. It was a surrender, a careful reverent letting go. Her hands found his shoulders. His breath caught. And for a moment, all that was broken didn't matter. In the morning, they didn't speak of it. But when she handed him his knife later, their fingers lingered just a breath longer than needed. That afternoon, a rider came. The horse was dust-caked and tired. Its rider wore a grey coat and carried no insignia, only a hunting rifle and a badge no law had given him. Eleanor froze. Her hand reached for Nanan's without thinking. The man dismounted with practiced ease. He didn't raise his weapon, but the threat lived in his eyes. Name's Jude Barlow, he said. I'm looking for a runaway named Eleanor Barrett. Bland, scar on her wrist, travels light. He tipped his hat to her. Found you. Dantan stepped between them. She stays. Barlo smirked. This ain't your war chief. She stays. Nontan repeated, voice flat. Barlo looked at Alolena again. Nox wants her back. Claims she's unwell. Claims she stole something. Let the lie sit. Eleanor stepped forward, heart pounding. And what does he think I stole? Barlo shrugged. Breathe. Maybe position. Maybe peace. He nodded to Nantan. You're welcome to go back to being nobody. This ain't your concern. Nan didn't move. Barlo tipped his hat again. You've been warned. And he rode off into the dusk, leaving hoofprints like saws across the sand. That night, Nantan sharpened his knife longer than usual. Eleanor sat near the fire, arms wrapped tight. He'll come back, she whispered. Wheeze more. Nan nodded. Jeez, I shouldn't have brought this here. You didn't bring trouble, he said. You brought choice. She looked at him. And what choice do we have? It added more cedar to the fire. The smoke curled upward like a question to the stars. We can hide, he said. Or we can make them remember that not all spirits stay buried. Rain came hard the next morning. Not the soft whisper of monsoon drizzles, but sharp wind-driven sheets that bent the most quiet trees and rattled the roof of the old chapel like bones in a drum. Alolena and Nantan worked in silence, securing what little gear they had. He moved with the calm precision of someone who'd lived through worse storms inside and out. She followed his lead, but her hands trembled when they tied the horses. Barlo will bring more, she said. Real man this time. Gans, Bagis, or something close enough. Nanton nodded. He rides for coin. Nox pays well. Eleanor gripped the edge of the wooden table until her knuckles blanched. He should run again. You shouldn't be caught in this. He turned slowly. You still think this is just your story? That stopped her. He was already hunted before you came, he said. Now at least I have something worth facing them for. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Nantan showed her how to set up perimeter snares, not for killing, but to warn them if someone crossed the ridge. He drew a map in the dirt of the canyon's layout, highlighting blind spots, boulders that echoed shots, and narrow passages they could defend. We won't win if they come 5-10 strong, he said. But we'll slow them. Long enough for what? She asked. He looked at her. Long enough to choose how we live. And how we die, Alolena thought, but didn't say it aloud. That evening, Nantan brought out something wrapped in deer skin, a pouch of dried plants, tiny clay beads, a strip of bark etched with symbols. What is it? She asked. A ritual for choosing, he said. In my mother's tongue, it's called Nani. A way to ask the smoke what path is true. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You believe it'll answer? Nan smiled, not with mockery, but the sadness of someone who had once hoped the world worked by clearer rules. The answer isn't always words. Sometimes it's what you feel in the stillness. She hesitated, then nodded. Then, show me. That night, they lit the fire in a stone ring. Danton placed the items into the flame, whispering in Apache. Eleanor sat opposite him, palms on her knees, watching the smoke rise. She saw images not clear, not visions, but flickers. Her mother's face, the sound of a church bell, her own hands bleeding as she pulled at a locked door, and then laughter, not cruel, not distant, her own laughter, and Nanan's. Somewhere in the distance, warm as morning light. When the smoke thinned, she looked up. Nonton met her eyes. What did you feel? He asked. Like I wasn't running anymore. He was standing still, but it felt right. He nodded. Then we stay. The next day, Eleanor practiced shooting. They first shot jarred her whole body. The sound echoed through the ravine like a slap to memory. She dropped the revolver covering her ears. "He can't," she gasped. It sounds like Nanton stepped forward, placing the gun back in her hands. It's not a memory. It's now. She tried again. Missed white. Then again. On the fourth shot, she hit a dried gourd. That did startle or rather, Dunn said. I'm not trying to startle him. I glanced at her. Then in with something more than fear. That night, she sat cleaning the revolver, hands no longer shaking. Nontan carved quietly nearby, shaping wood into the handle of a second knife. Their silence was companionable now, like two rivers running alongside each other, separate, but in rhythm. 3 days passed. No sign of Barlo. But the wind changed. On the fourth night, Eleanor opened her mother's letter. She read it twice, then again. Inside it was a single page written in trembling script. If you ever run out, don't let shame chase you. Let love guide you. And if you find someone who speaks in silence, hold on tight. Ella be listening in the smoke. Eleanor sat still for a long time, tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't hide them. Nontan approached quietly, knelt beside her. You found your voice. She nodded. It was always there. He just needed someone to listen. That night, she crawled into his bedroll without speaking. He didn't ask questions. His arms opened. She pressed into the heat of him, heart steady now. There were no declarations, no promise, only the soft shared breath of two souls choosing the same road, no matter how narrow. At dawn, hoofbeats, not just one. Eleanor and Dunn rose at once. They checked the snares. 2 had been triggered. They took position. Eleanor behind a rock wall with her revolver. Nontan perched along the ridge with his bow. 5 riders, Barlow at the front. They approached cautiously, hands near their holsters. One wore a marshal's coat, but no badge. Another carried shackles. Eleanor's mouth went dry. Barlow called out. He said I'd come back. Knox doubled the price. Nontan called down. You won't get her. Barlow grinned. I ain't planning to take her. You'st need the body to prove we tried. Eleanor stepped forward. Then you'll have to try harder. She raised her gun. Barlow's smile faded. You sure you're ready to die for this, Miss Barrett? Dunn's voice echoed from above. She's not dying today. The standoff stretched long. Then Barlow raised his hand. 2 men dismounted. Shots rang out, but the desert was their ally. Dunn's traps worked. One rider fell screaming into a pit of sharpened sticks. Another's horse reared, tangled in wire. Eleanor fired twice, missed once, hit once. Her hand never wavered. Barlow took cover, bleeding from a graze to his shoulder. She ain't worth this, he shouted to his men. But no one answered. The last rider fled. One lay still. Barlow cursed, grabbed the reins of his horse, and galloped away. When silence returned, Eleanor exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Nontan came down, blood on his sleeve, but a laugh. They didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, they began cleaning up, burning the bodies, burying the blood-soaked earth beneath stone. As the fire crackled, Eleanor dropped the shackles they brought into the flames. The metal hissed, twisted, blackened. No more chains, she said. Nontan made her gas. Only choice. And from the chapel behind them, smoke curled once more into the sky. The air smelled of burned iron and dust. Smoke drifted low over the ravine like an old god remembering its wounds. Eleanor stood at the edge of the clearing, hands shaking, breath ragged. Her revolver hung limp at her side, smoke still curling from the barrel. Blood stained the cuff of her dress. Not hers. They had won, but it didn't feel like victory. Iskotin was dead. Nontan knelt beside his friend's body, his face blank, unmoving. He pressed his palm to the warrior's chest, whispering words Eleanor couldn't understand. The Apache men had arrived just 2 nights before, bringing quiet confidence and extra hands to their defense. They had known the land better than either of them, had laughed low and raised her as though saving it for the right moment, and he had taken a bullet meant for her. When Nontan finally rose, his hands were strewn with red clay and ash. He met Eleanor's eyes not with anger, but with a grief too old to scream. He gave his life because I chose not to run, she said, voice raw. Nontan shook his head. He gave his life because he believed in what we stayed for. They buried Ishkotan under a mesquite tree on the hill where the roots ran deep and the birds still remembered how to sing. Nantan performed the death song alone, his voice steady but hollow like wine through a dry canyon. Eleanor lit the sage bundle with trembling hands. She didn't know the words, but she felt the meaning. Each breath of smoke was a thank you. A letting go, a prayer that the man's soul would not wander in a world that had never made room for his peace. When the fire burned down to white bones and glowing stones, they sat beside it until dawn. No one spoke of tomorrow. The days that followed fell into quiet rituals. Eleanor tended to the horses, though one limped from the skirmish. She mended what clothes she could. Nan hunted less, spoke even less. His silence returned not cruel, not distant, but wounded. She left him space, but space has a way of echoing. One evening, she found him at the chapel's threshold, carving something into the beam above the doorway. She stood beside Sidim and saw a new mark, a line deep and clean next to the others. For Iskot, she asked. Nadith. It was my brother in spirit. His mark belongs here. She reached out, touched the notch. Then mine should be here, though. He looked at her, brow furrowed. You're not dead. No, but I'm not who I was when I came here. She took the knife, carved her own small symbol, not a line, but a circle open on one side. For becoming, she said. He stared at it a long moment. Then, without a word, he took her hand and pressed it to his heart. That night, Eleanor lit the fire herself. They sat close, not out of need, but because the silence no longer hurt. Tell me about your son, she asked softly. Nanton didn't flinch. His name was Lanza. It means red hawk. He was born in winter. Though small but strong. He paused. They took him from my wife's arms. Say that was for peace. Say the Apache children needed to be civilized. He didn't survive the winter. Eleanor's hand gripped his. I'm so sorry. Nadith. They buried him behind a fence. He was not allowed to see him. So now I carry him here. He tapped his chest and here. He pointed to the stars. In the quiet that followed, Eleanor reached into her pack and brought out a small cloth bundle. Inside was a medallion worn silver, shaped like a flower. It belonged to my mother. She wore it the day she died. She placed it in his palm. Keep it. If something happens to me, you'll have a piece that remembers. Nan didn't close his hand. Nothing will happen to you. She smiled. You can't promise that. Then I promise I'll remember. The next morning, the wind shifted. Nantan walked the ridge. Eleanor cleaned the rifles. Their lives had changed closer to battle than love, but there was no regret in either of them. Not now. As the sun dipped low, they saw movement in the valley. 2 riders. One bore the limp body of a man tied to the back of his saddle. A warning. Knox had returned. This time he didn't send mercenaries. He came himself. They took cover. Eleanor crouched behind the rock wall, aiming her rifle with hands steadier than she'd ever thought possible. Nanton crouched beside Acer, bow drawn. Knox stopped being the jar from the chapel. He wore a clean suit, dustless boots, and an expression like a man who'd never lost a battle. I'll make this quick, he called out. Hand her over, and I'll let you live. Eleanor stood slowly. I'd rather die here than rot in your house. Knox's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then you'll die in dust. The fight was short and brutal. None struck the first man with an arrow to the throat. Eleanor shot the second as he tried to flank her. Knox charged forward. Pistol raised, firing wildly. A shot rang out. A foul. Eleanor's hand trembled. Smoke curdled from the barrel of her revolver. She had not missed. Knox didn't die instantly. He gasped, hand pressed to his stomach, blood spreading through his white shirt. Eleanor walked to him. She didn't speak. Only watched. His eyes searched hers not for mercy but understanding. He found neither. Then he stilled. That night they lit a new fire, not to mourn, but to mark. They called it the bonfire where memory burned, but the past no longer ruled. They burned Noxiesti's suit, his letters, the chain he'd brought. Eleanor stood beside the flames, eyes dry, voice strong, stern. No more hiding, no more shame. Nanton wrapped his arm around her. Only choice. And under a sky wide enough to hold all their scars, they let the last ashes of their old lives blow free into the dark. The desert was quieter now, not silent, no, it never truly slept, but softened, as if it too had exhaled after holding its breath far too long. The wind ran gentler through the moss quiet. The coyotes called from farther off. Even the stars seemed closer, like elders leaning in to hear the final verses of an old song. Nanton stood outside the chapel, sharpening a blade against stone. Not for battle, not anymore, for carving, for shaping wood and leather, and a life not born of escape, but of choosing. Behind him, from within the worn stone walls, came the low, steady hum of Eleanor's voice. She was reading aloud, and slow to a young boy seated cross-legged in front of her. A boy with chestnut hair, dust on his cheeks, and eyes like winter smoke. His name was Iskotin Bered Loma. Born 8 months after Nox fell, he had come into the world with fists curled and lungs full of protest. He bore the names of the fallen and the living. The brother in spirit who died for them. The mother who rose from her past. The father who learned to love in silence. He was two now. Quick with feet, quicker with questions. Eleanor taught him letters beside the altar stone, not to make him civilized as others once tried with Apache children, but to make him free. Free to name his world, to question it, and to find his voice early before someone tried to take it from him. Nantan had become something else, though. Not a warrior, not just a father. They began carving saddles again, fine ones, simple but sturdy, and folks from miles around came for them. Not many spoke openly of his past, but they knew the stories. They saw the quiet pride in the way he held his son, or the care in how he built each new saddle tree, and they respected him for that. Some even called him the man who made peace with smoke. The chapel had changed. Its walls stood firm again. Mended by stone and sweat. The roof still creaked, but no longer leaked. Inside, Eleanor had hung cedar bundles in the rafters, and Nantan painted sun symbols near the entrance. They didn't call it a church. They didn't need to call it anything. It was theirs, a place to remember, to begin again, to forgive the earth beneath their feet and listen to the whispers of the past without letting them bind the future. One evening in late spring, as the sun sank behind the mesa, and the wind carried that sweet blue dusk smell, Eleanor sat on the steps of the chapel, her skirt spread wide like a resting bird. She held a letter in her hands creased and ink faded. It was from a cousin back east. The kind one, the only one who had ever sent help when Nox still held the reins. They asked where I went, she murmured. Nanton sat beside her. What will you tell them? She smiled. That I found a place where the sky listens and a man who doesn't need to speak loud to be heard. In nodded. She folded the letter, set it in the fire. The paper curled inward like a blossom. The ink blackened and vanished. Only smoke rose soft, smirling skewered like a memory with no weight. That night after Ishkat fell asleep curled in a horse blanket beside the fire, Alalena and Nantan stepped outside. They stood in silence, hands clasped. Do you think they see us? She asked. Your mother? My mother, the others. He looked up. If they do, they know we're not ghosts. She turned to him. What are we then? He pulled her close. Smoke that found form again. In the months that followed, they kept building, a stable, a lean-to, a small room with shelves where Eleanor taught local children who came by mule and barefoot walk. Nantan made bows for their parents, each one signed with a single circle notched open on one side. And when strangers passed through, looking for directions or a place to rest, they found not a ruin, but a home, not a warrior and a runaway, but two people whose eyes held stories too long for words. One summer evening, a rider came from El Paso. A woman this time, dust-covered but sharpie. She stayed for water and shade. As she drank, her gaze wandered to the boy drawing in the dirt. Yours, she asked. Eleanor. She nodded. You married? Eleanor hesitated, smiled. Not in the way you mean, but yes. The writer tipped her hat. Looks like the kind of marriage more folks ought to have. And she wrote on. That night, Nanton sat at the fire polishing a carved wooden box. Inside, folded and wrapped in cloth, was the flower-shaped medallion Eleanor had once given him. She took it from his hands, thumb tracing the shape. I think it's time, she said. For what? To pass it down. He raised an eyebrow. To who? She looked toward their son, asleep again in his father's coat. To the one who will remember both sides of the fire. And so, under a sky filled with stars old as sorrow and soft as hope, they handed the medallion to a sleeping child. He stirred only slightly, enough to feel it warm in his palm. Enough perhaps to dream of a world that had once burned and the smoke that rose soft above it all. Whispering smoke ends here with hearts not healed all at once but mended slow and true. A place where love wasn't loud but steady. Where peace came not from silence but from listening deeply. Where memory like smoke didn't choke but rose soft and free. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this.